Let me tell you something about the morning my life changed forever. It started with a kiss. Not just any kiss. The kind that makes you forget your own name for 3 full seconds. The kind where your toes curl inside your sneakers and you pull back and look at the person standing in front of you and think, how did I get this lucky? Carter pressed his lips to my forehead at 5:47 in the morning, and I know the exact time because I had one eye open and one eye on the clock because I was already running late for my shift. His hands were warm on either side of my face. His cologne was that expensive one I had complained about being too strong the first time he wore it, and then secretly started pressing my nose into his shirts when he wasn't looking just to get more of it. He smelled like cedarwood and something I didn't have a word for yet. Safety, maybe? Or the closest thing I had ever felt to it. You're going to be late, he murmured against my hair. I know, I said. I didn't move. He laughed. That low, quiet laugh that lived somewhere between his chest and his throat, the one I had spent 11 months trying to describe to my best friend Renee and always failed at. Jade. He said my name like it was something he enjoyed the taste of. Go save some lives. I kissed him one more time, grabbed my keys, grabbed my coffee, forgot my badge, went back for my badge, knocked over the coffee, wiped up the coffee, kissed him one final time because I could, and left. I was smiling the entire drive to work. The kind of smile that makes strangers at red lights look at you a little funny. The kind that sits on your face without your permission. I had the windows cracked even though it was only 62 degrees outside because I wanted the air on my skin. I was happy. Genuinely, embarrassingly, completely happy. I want you to hold on to that image of me for a second. Hold it tight. Because that version of me, that woman smiling at red lights with wind in her face and cedarwood cologne still faintly on her collar, she was about to walk into a shift that would rearrange every single thing she thought she knew about her life. And she had absolutely no idea. I have been a registered nurse for 6 years. I work the morning shift at a mid-sized private clinic in Midtown Atlanta. Not the big hospital downtown with the valet parking and the waterfall in the lobby. Ours is quieter. We handle general outpatient care, routine checkups, prescription management, some urgent care overflow on weekends when the ER down the street gets backed up with people who waited 3 days too long to deal with something they should have dealt with on day one. I love my job. I want to say that clearly before the story goes where it goes. I love it because there is something about being the person in the room when someone is scared that grounds me in a way nothing else ever has. People come in falling apart, and I get to be the steady thing. That matters to me. My name is Jade Emerson. I am 32 years old. I grew up in Decatur, went to Georgia State for nursing school, finished near the top of my class, which I mention not to brag, but because my mother still brings it up at every family dinner as if I graduated last Tuesday. I am 5'4" on a good day. I have locks that I keep pinned up at work and let loose on weekends, and I drink too much coffee and not enough water, which I am aware is ironic for someone who tells patients to stay hydrated approximately 40 times a day. And 11 months before the morning I am telling you about, I met Carter Caldwell at a rooftop fundraiser that Renee dragged me to against my will. I was not supposed to fall in love that night. I was supposed to drink 2 glasses of wine, smile politely at strangers, and leave by 9 so I could catch up on sleep before a double shift. That was the plan. Renee knows what she is doing when she makes plans for me. I'll give her that, because somehow the plan always ends with me in a situation I could not have scripted. Carter was standing near the bar talking to someone, not performing for the room, not working it, just talking. He had this quality of stillness about him that drew the eye. Like everyone else was moving slightly too fast, and he had simply decided not to. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of handsome that doesn't announce itself immediately but builds on you slowly. And he was wearing a dark blazer over a simple white shirt, and he looked comfortable in his own skin in a way that I have always found unreasonably attractive. He caught me looking. I looked away. He walked over anyway. You look like someone who was told this would be fun and is currently reconsidering, he said. I laughed before I could stop myself. Is it that obvious? Only to someone else who was told the same thing. We talked for 2 hours. We closed the rooftop down. I missed my 9 o'clock bedtime by 4 hours, and I did not care even a little bit. By the 3rd date, I knew he was different. Not in a vague romantic way. In a specific, observable, this man shows up when he says he will show up kind of way. He remembered things. Small things. That I hated raisins in my oatmeal. That my younger sister's name was Brianna and that we had a complicated relationship I had mentioned exactly once, briefly, in passing. That I took my coffee with oat milk because regular dairy made me feel like I had swallowed a small brick. He paid attention. And if you have ever spent significant time with someone who does not pay attention, you will understand why a man who does feels like cold water on a burn. We moved in together 7 months in. I know. Renee said the exact same thing with her exact same face. But it felt right in the way that some things just feel right, and I have learned to trust my gut because my gut has historically been a more reliable narrator than my head. The apartment was his. A gorgeous, high-ceiling place in Buckhead with floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen that made me feel like a person who actually knew how to cook, which I do not, but the kitchen made me feel like I could learn. We talked about the future the way people do when they are not scared of it. The wedding came up naturally, not as a pressure but as a direction, the way you talk about a trip you're both planning, easy and certain, and something to look forward to. That morning, the 5:47 morning, we were 6 weeks away from him officially proposing. I didn't know the exact date, but I knew it was coming because I had found the ring box 3 weeks earlier while looking for the phone charger in his nightstand drawer. I had put it back exactly as I found it, closed the drawer, walked calmly to the bathroom, and then silently lost my entire mind in the most dignified way possible, which involved pressing both hands over my mouth and doing a small jumping celebration in front of the bathroom mirror, like a contestant on a game show. That was my life. That was what I was driving away from at 5:47 in the morning. I want you to really feel that, because what happens next is going to hurt. And I need you to understand exactly how much I had to lose before you understand exactly what was taken from me. Welcome back to Daydream BL and GL Besties. If you're new here and this story already has you hooked, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now because trust me, you are going to want to be here for every single part of this. This story goes places you will not see coming. Now, let's keep going. I got to the clinic at 6:15, which for me counts as on time because technically my shift starts at 6:30 and the 15 minutes I use to get settled, make my second coffee, and have a quiet moment before the day begins is sacred to me. My colleague Darius was already at the nurse's station when I walked in, reading something on his phone with the expression of a man who has seen something deeply concerning on the internet. "Good morning," I said. "Did you know," he said without looking up, "that there are people who eat cereal with orange juice instead of milk?" I stared at him. "Why are you doing this to me before 7? Someone has to warn the people." "Darius. I'm just saying. The world is not safe." This is the thing about Darius. He has been my work husband for 4 years in the way that only people who survive 12-hour shifts together can become work spouses. We finish each other's sentences, we cover each other's breaks without being asked, and we have a silent language of eyebrow raises and head tilts that communicates entire paragraphs in patient rooms when we cannot speak freely. He is 6'2", chronically unbothered, and makes the worst jokes known to mankind with absolute confidence and zero remorse. I love him like a brother, and I tell him this regularly, and he responds every time by saying, "I know, I'm very lovable," and going back to whatever he was doing. I settled in, pulled up my patient schedule for the day, and took a long sip of coffee. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays at our clinic were usually moderate. Not the chaos of Mondays when everyone who suffered through the weekend finally surrendered and came in. Not the quiet of Thursdays when people were saving their energy for the weekend. Tuesday was manageable. I liked Tuesday. The first few hours moved the way morning hours do when the day is behaving. Routine checkups. A teenager with a sprained wrist who had clearly been doing something on a skateboard that his mother didn't know about. An elderly gentleman named Mr. Patterson who came in every 3 weeks for blood pressure monitoring and spent 20 minutes telling me about his garden with a level of passion that I genuinely respected. A young woman convinced she had something exotic and rare who had a sinus infection. And then, around 9:15, she walked in. I almost missed it. I almost looked at her the way you look at any patient walking through the door, a quick professional assessment, a smile, a clipboard. But something made me look twice. I don't know what it was. Some instinct that nursing puts in you after enough years, the ability to read a body the way you read a room, to know when someone is carrying something heavier than what they came in for. She was in her early 30s. Pretty in the way that made you think she must have been stunning when she was fully herself, because even now, distracted and slightly hollow behind the eyes, she was striking. She was dressed carefully, which is how I would put it. The kind of dress that takes effort to look effortless. Silk blouse, tailored trousers, good shoes. Her hair was natural, pulled back. Her makeup was done, and done well. But her eyes were a different story. Her eyes were the eyes of someone who had not slept properly in a long time. She came to the desk, and before the receptionist could even open her mouth, she said, quietly but firmly, "No file. No intake forms. Cash only." Our receptionist, Portia, blinked. "Ma'am, our policy is—" "I understand your policy," the woman said. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something tightly wound. "I'm asking you to make an exception. I need to see a nurse. I can pay whatever you need. But I cannot have a file." Portia looked at me. I looked at the woman. I said, "Come on back." Her name, she told me when we were in the private exam room with the door closed, was Vivien. Just Vivien. No last name, and I did not push. She had been coming to clinics like ours, she said, small private ones that moved quietly, for about a year. She needed her medication refilled. She pulled a bottle from her purse. An antidepressant. A serious one, not the kind you prescribe for mild situational sadness. The kind that tells you this person has been in a particular kind of darkness for a particular length of time. "How long have you been on this dosage?" I asked. "About 8 months. "And the prescribing doctor?" A pause. "It's complicated." I looked at her. She looked back at me steadily, and in that look I understood everything I needed to understand. She was hiding this from someone. The medication, the appointments, all of it. She was managing something enormous, and she was managing it alone, and she had built a system for doing so that did not include a paper trail. I have a policy of my own that I've developed over 6 years of this work, and it is simply this: if a patient comes to me, they deserve care. My job is not to police the circumstances of how they got here. My job is to help. So I refilled her prescription, I checked her vitals, I gave her the care she came for. And I asked, as gently as I knew how, if there was anything else she needed. She said no. She paid in cash, exact change, and she left. I stood in that exam room for a moment after she walked out, and I felt something I couldn't immediately name. Not pity. Something closer to recognition, though of what exactly I couldn't say. Not yet. She came back 3 weeks later. Same routine. Cash. No file. Prescription refill. This time her vitals were slightly elevated, blood pressure a little higher than I would have liked, and I noted it and mentioned it, and she nodded the way people nod when they have heard information, but have decided to hold it at arm's length for now. We were not friends. We were nurse and patient. But in the particular intimacy of that arrangement, I was learning her in small ways. She always wore long sleeves, which I noticed without noting it, the way you file things away without meaning to. She always arrived exactly on time, not early, not late, as though timing was something she controlled very carefully. She always left quickly, the way someone leaves when they have somewhere to be or someone waiting. The 4th time she came in, I was having a genuinely chaotic morning. 3 patients backed up, Darius on break, the supply order wrong for the 2nd time that month, and I had spilled something on my scrub top and was dealing with that with a paper towel and deep personal resentment. She sat in the exam room and waited with her hands folded in her lap while I got myself together, and I appreciated that. She had patience. The particular kind of patience that looks, up close, a lot like someone who has learned to wait because waiting was something that had been required of them for a very long time. "Sorry for the wait," I said. "Please," she said. "Don't apologize." I did her refill. I rechecked her blood pressure. And then something made me pause. A clinical instinct. She looked tired in a new way. Not the chronic tiredness I had learned to read on her. Something fresher. Something that was sitting differently. "Vivien," I said carefully, "how have you been feeling overall?" "Not just the depression. Overall." She considered the question. "Tired." Any nausea? A flicker across her face. So small I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking directly at her. Some. I thought it was the medication adjustment. I went quiet for a moment. When was your last period? The silence that followed that question was the loudest silence I have heard in a long time. She looked at me. I looked at her. And then she looked down at her hands in her lap, and she said nothing at all. I did not make a production of it. I simply said, I'm going to run a quick test, okay? It'll just take a moment. It took 5 minutes. When I came back into the room, she was sitting exactly where I left her, same position, hands still folded, except that her jaw was set now, slightly, the way you set your jaw when you are bracing for something. I sat across from her and I said quietly, Vivien, you're pregnant. She closed her eyes. Not dramatically. Not with tears or a sharp intake of breath. She simply closed her eyes the way you close your eyes when something you feared has been confirmed and you are taking one single moment to absorb it before you have to deal with it. When she opened them, her voice was completely steady. I want to terminate it. Okay, I said. Let's talk about that. We would need to refer you out. We don't perform procedures here, but I can give you information and I need it done as quickly as possible. There was an urgency in her voice now that had not been there before. A tightness. I cannot keep this baby. I cannot have a baby in that house. In that house. I noticed the phrasing. I stored it. I understand, I said. Before we talk referral, I need to do a few more tests. Standard. Okay, she agreed. And when the results came back over the next hour, I sat with them for a long moment before I went back to her. Because here is the thing about medicine. The body tells the truth even when people cannot. Vivien had what we call placenta previa, a condition where the placenta has positioned itself directly over the cervical opening instead of at the top or side of the uterus. In the early stages, as hers was, any attempt at surgical termination, any instrument introduced into that cervical canal, carried an extreme risk of triggering catastrophic hemorrhaging. The kind of bleeding that happens fast and does not stop easily. The kind that kills people. Not as a scare tactic. Not as a statistic. As a real and present danger that I could not in good conscience send her into without warning her that she might not walk out. I went back into the room. I sat down. And I told her the truth. She heard me out. Her face did not change while I explained. She was still and quiet and attentive the way she always was, and when I finished she said, "Is there any other way? There are options we can explore as the pregnancy progresses, positions of the placenta can shift, and I'll be monitoring you closely. But right now, today, attempting this is something I can't in good conscience refer you for. The risk to your life is too significant." She looked at the wall, then back at me. "So I have to keep it. For now, I need you coming in regularly. Weekly if possible. I need to track how this is progressing. And Vivien," I said her name the way I say the names of patients when I need them to hear me all the way through, "I need you to take care of yourself. More than you have been." She nodded. She paid. She left. She came back the next week. And the week after that. And slowly, the shape of our appointments began to change. She began talking more. Small things at first. The weather. A book she had read. The particular quality of Atlanta traffic on Tuesday mornings. I learned she was smart, sharply so, the kind of smart that people sometimes hide because they have been in rooms where it made others uncomfortable. I learned she had a dry, careful sense of humor that she deployed so quietly you almost missed it. I learned she liked old films, the black and white kind, and that she could quote dialogue from memory and was mildly embarrassed about this in a way that I found deeply endearing. I was not supposed to get attached. I know the rules. I went to school. I understand the principle of professional distance. But there is a version of human connection that does not ask your permission, that does not consult your training or your protocols, that simply happens in the space between two people who keep showing up in the same room. I was not attached in the way that blurred lines. I was attached in the way that made me careful. That made me pay attention. That made me think about her when she wasn't there and wonder how she was doing and feel something quiet and protective when she walked through the door. I told Carter about her once. Not by name, not with details, just in the abstract way nurses sometimes decompress after a long shift. I said something like, I have a patient who's in a hard situation and I wish I could do more. He had put his arm around me and said, you're doing plenty just by being there. And I had believed that and felt better. I think about that moment now and I want to scream. But I'm getting ahead of myself. About 6 weeks into Vivien's regular appointments, she came in on a Thursday. She was not supposed to come on a Thursday. We had established a Tuesday rhythm, same time, same room. Thursday was not part of it. When Portia called me to the front and I walked out and saw her standing there, my first reaction was clinical. Something is wrong. Something has changed. And then I actually looked at her. She was wearing sunglasses inside. Now, I live in Atlanta. I understand sunglasses. I own 7 pairs of sunglasses. Sunglasses inside, however, is a specific choice that means a specific thing, and my stomach understood what my brain was still catching up to when she took them off at my quiet request once we were in the private exam room. The bruise around her left eye was deep purple, edging into green at the outer corners the way bruises do when they are 2 or 3 days old. Her bottom lip had a small split in it that had scabbed over. There was bruising along her jaw, faint but present if you knew to look, and a nurse always knows to look. I did not react the way I wanted to react. The way I wanted to react involved volume and language that was not clinical. Instead, I sat down across from her, slowly, and I said in my steadiest voice, Vivien, can you tell me what happened? I fell, she said. On the stairs. I know how it looks. Okay. I let the silence breathe for a moment. I need to examine you. May I? She let me. I was thorough and I was gentle and I kept my face professional and controlled the entire time even as my chest was doing something painful and angry. No additional injuries that I could see beyond what was visible, thank God, and the baby, I confirmed with the portable monitor, was doing fine. Heart rate steady. Position unchanged. She exhaled when she heard the heartbeat. Something about that exhale got me. The way relief moved through her body at the sound of that heartbeat, even as she sat there bruised and split-lipped, even as she had told me every week for 6 weeks that she did not want this child. She exhaled like someone who, despite everything, was grateful. Can you still evacuate it? She asked, the clinical word she had learned from me, the one she used now instead of terminate, as though the medical language made the conversation easier to hold. The baby is developing well, I said. The placenta position has not changed significantly enough. Vivien. I waited until she looked at me. Who did this to you? I told you. The stairs. Stairs don't close a woman's eye like that. She held my gaze for a moment, and then she looked away. Her hands, folded in her lap as always, tightened slightly, knuckles shifting under the skin. And then she started to cry. Not loudly. Vivien didn't do anything loudly. She cried the way she did everything, quietly, with control, except that this time the control was slipping. The tears came steadily, and she pressed her lips together, and her whole body was involved in the effort of keeping herself intact, and still everything was coming through. I did not hand her a tissue immediately, which is something they don't teach you in nursing school, but that I have learned over years. Sometimes reaching for a tissue is the thing that closes a person back up, because it makes the crying a problem to be solved instead of something to be witnessed. So I sat still. I was there. I let her feel that she was not alone in the room. After a moment I said, very quietly, you can tell me. Whatever you say to me stays in this room. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the window. Then she looked back at me, and something in her eyes had shifted. Something had made a decision. She started talking. Her name, her full name, was Vivien. She was 30 years old. She had gotten married at 20, 10 years ago, to a man who was 30 at the time. I want you to hear that. 20 years old. He was a decade older, established, successful, certain of himself and of what he wanted, and she had been 20 years old and she had believed, the way you believe things at 20 when someone older and certain is telling them to you, that this was love. And for 3 years it was. Or it was enough like love that she could not tell the difference. They had a beautiful home in Buckhead. He was wealthy, real estate, old money rebuilt into new, the kind of wealthy that looks like elegance rather than excess. They traveled. They had a life that looked, from the outside, like everything. She had friends, a social circle, a role. She had not finished college because he had suggested, gently, that she didn't need to, and at 20 years old she had agreed, and at 30 she understood exactly what that decision had cost her. 3 years in, she walked into their bedroom in the middle of the afternoon and found her husband with another woman. She told me this part the way you describe a car accident you survived. The clinical retrospective of someone who has processed the initial impact and is now just reporting the facts. She had walked in. She had seen. She had backed out of the room. She had gone downstairs and sat in the kitchen, and she told me she remembered noticing that the housekeeper had cleaned the windows and that the light was coming through them very clearly, and that she had sat there looking at the clean windows thinking about nothing because her brain had simply stopped. He had come downstairs. He had sat across from her at the kitchen table. And he had said, with the particular calm of a man who had prepared for this moment, that she needed to understand the nature of their life together. That he provided. That she was taken care of. That he had needs and that her role was not to question how those needs were managed. She was 23 years old. She stayed. I need you to sit with that for a second and resist the urge to judge it, because I know that urge. I felt it briefly and then I felt ashamed of it. She stayed because she was 23 years old and had no degree and no independent income, and because his name was on everything, the house, the accounts, everything. She stayed because her father had gotten sick that same year, a degenerative illness that required ongoing medical care that her husband paid for. She stayed because she was scared, and because leaving felt like stepping off a cliff into nothing. And he knew all of that. He knew every single exit she might have used, and he had, deliberately or by design, closed them all. After the woman in the bedroom, he changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, not in a way she could have pointed to and said, "Look, this is the moment." Slowly. The way a temperature drops in a room. The way you go from comfortable to cold without noticing the exact moment the shift happened. He became controlling. Small things at first, preferences about where she went and who she saw and what she wore. Then larger things. Monitoring her phone. Requiring her to account for her time. And then, the first time he raised his hand to her, he apologized so thoroughly and so convincingly that she believed it was the last time. It was not the last time. By the time she was sitting in my exam room with a bruised eye and a split lip and a baby she didn't know how to want, it had happened more times than she was prepared to say out loud. And the only system of escape she had built for herself was a clinic where no one kept a file and a prescription that kept the worst of the darkness at bay. I sat with everything she told me, and I held it carefully, the way you hold something that is both fragile and burning. I asked her to go to the police. She looked at me with something that was almost, not quite, a smile. The saddest almost smile I have ever seen on a person. And she said, "He pays my father's medical bills. If I go to the police and this becomes what it is, he will stop. And my father will not survive what comes after." I did not have an answer to that. There is no clean answer to that. That is the thing they don't put in the pamphlets, the social service brochures, the leave him flowcharts that people post online with the best intentions in the world. They don't account for the specific, engineered entrapment of a man who has spent 7 years making sure that every door that might have let her out had his name on the lock. She left that day with her prescription, with instructions to ice her face, with the knowledge that I would see her next Tuesday, and with something new between us that did not have a professional name, but that I would call, if pressed, trust. I drove home that evening feeling like I had been wrung out. Heavy in a way that the body absorbs when the mind has held too much. Carter was in the kitchen when I got home. He had made dinner, actual dinner, pasta with a sauce from scratch, because he had been watching cooking videos for the past month with the obsessive dedication of someone who had discovered a new religion. The apartment smelled incredible. The table was set. There was a candle, not a romantic production of it, just a candle, the small vanilla one I kept on the counter that he had lit because he knew I liked it. I stood in the doorway and looked at him at the stove, his back to me, moving with that easy comfort he had in our shared space, and I felt something so large and so complicated that it took up the whole room. "Hey," he said, without turning around. He had heard the door. He always heard the door. "Hard day." Yeah, I said. Hard day. He turned and looked at me. Really looked, the way he did, the specific quality of attention he gave me that I had spent 11 months being grateful for. Come here, he said. I crossed the kitchen. He pulled me in and held me without asking questions, which is exactly the right thing to do, and which not enough people know how to do. I pressed my face against his chest, and I smelled cedarwood, and I thought about Vivien sitting in a kitchen looking at clean windows. I wanted to tell him. Not the details, not her name, none of the specifics that were hers to keep, but the general shapeless weight of it. The anger I was carrying about a man I didn't know who had taken a 20-year-old girl and systematically closed every window in her life until she couldn't breathe. But confidentiality is confidentiality. It is not just a rule to me. It is a value. The reason Vivien could walk into my exam room and speak was because she trusted that what she said stayed there. And so I held what I knew and I let Carter hold me and I said nothing. Hungry? He asked. Starving, I said. We ate dinner. He made me laugh 3 times, which was normal. He made me laugh easily and often, and I had always considered this one of the great gifts of him. He asked about my day in the way that left room for me to share or not share, no pressure either way. He told me about a deal he was working on, something in Midtown, a development he had been negotiating for months that was finally moving. He was animated when he talked about work, confident, knowledgeable, the energy of someone who was genuinely good at what they did and knew it without being obnoxious about it. I watched him talk and I thought about how well I knew him. How much I had learned about him in 11 months. His habits and his preferences and his soft spots, the things that made him light up and the things that made him go quiet. I knew him, I thought. I had paid attention. I went to bed that night still carrying the weight of what Vivien had told me, but also held by the warmth of the life I was building, and I told myself that those 2 things, her darkness and my light, existed in separate compartments. That I could carry one and live in the other. I was a nurse. I was used to holding other people's pain without letting it swallow me. I was trained for this. What I was not trained for was what came next. 3 weeks passed. Vivien came to her Tuesday appointments. She was doing her best in the way that people do their best when their best is happening inside a situation that is fundamentally wrong. The bruising faded. She looked slightly more rested some weeks and devastated other weeks, and I learned to read her the way I had learned to read the clinic itself, by the small signals, the microshifts that told the larger story. The baby was growing. The placenta had migrated slightly, not enough, not yet, but the direction was encouraging. I told her this carefully, not as good news exactly, because I understood that for Vivien it was complicated news, but as information she deserved to have. It's moving, I said, during one of our Tuesday appointments. Not where we need it yet, but the trajectory is right. She looked at the sonogram image I had printed for her with an expression I could not fully decode. She took it. She folded it carefully and put it in her purse, which she did not have to do, and which she did not acknowledge doing, and I said nothing about it. During this time, Carter and I were in the good, steady warmth of a relationship that was working. We had started talking more concretely about the wedding. Not in the ring box in the drawer way, that was still his secret as far as he knew, but in the easy general way of 2 people who have decided on each other. Guest list loosely. Season, probably spring. Something small and meaningful over something large and performative, which I had opinions about and which he, to his credit, actually cared about getting right. He was working long hours. The Midtown development was in a critical phase, he said. Late nights, early mornings, some weekend calls. I understood. I worked a job that did not respect the clock either. We were good at giving each other space without it becoming distance. That is a particular skill in a relationship, and we had it. Or I thought we had it. Looking back, I count the moments. The slight distraction behind his eyes some evenings. The times his phone buzzed and he turned the screen slightly away before answering, which I had noticed with the detached observation of someone who was not yet reading it as a signal. The Saturday he said he had to go into the office and came home 3 hours later than he'd estimated and was quieter than usual over dinner. I had noticed these things the way you notice furniture in a room, present but not drawing attention, part of the landscape. I was not suspicious. I want to be clear about that. because it matters for what comes next. I was not suspicious because I trusted him. And I trusted him because he had given me every reason to trust him and no real reason not to, and I was a person who believed in reading what was actually written rather than writing my own version of things. That was a Tuesday in October. Vivien came in that day, and she was good, actually good, in a way I hadn't seen in a while. She had slept. You can tell when someone has actually slept. The tissue around the eyes is different. The set of the face is different. She had slept and she had eaten something decent and her blood pressure was in a better range and the baby was doing well, and she sat in the exam room and said, almost to herself, "He's been away this week. Business trip." I nodded. I made my notes. "It's different," she said, "when he's not there." "I can imagine." "It's quiet," she said. And then, after a pause, I forgot what quiet felt like. I looked at her. She was looking at the window, the same window she always looked at when she was working something out. And I thought about the version of her that existed in that quiet, the woman who read before bed and tended whatever part of herself she was able to tend in the space he left when he was gone. "Vivien," I said, "I want to ask you something and I need you to know you don't have to answer." She looked at me. "Is there anyone? Anyone at all? Who knows what's happening?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You do." I sat with that. The weight of it. The loneliness encoded in those two words. "Okay," I said. "Then I've got you. Whatever that's worth." She looked at me in a way I couldn't fully categorize. Not pity. She didn't want pity. She had made that clear without saying it. Not gratitude exactly, though it was partly that. Something more like recognition. Like finding something you didn't know you had lost. She left. I finished my shift. I went home. Carter was already there, which surprised me because he had said the meetings were running long. He was on the couch, phone face down on the cushion beside him, looking at the television without really watching it. "You're home early," I said. "Wrapped up sooner than expected." He smiled. The smile reached his eyes. Carter's smile always reached his eyes. That was one of the things that had drawn me to him first, the authenticity of it. "How was your day?" I asked. "Long," he said. "But good." He reached out his hand. I took it. He pulled me down onto the couch beside him. "Tell me something good," he said. It was a thing we did. End of hard days. Tell me something good. It had started as something I'd said once after a particularly brutal shift and had become a ritual between us, quiet and regular and ours. I thought for a moment. My patient looked better today. Genuinely better. "The one you've been worried about?" I had said that once. That I was worried. I hadn't said anything else. "Yeah," I said. He squeezed my hand. "Good," he said. "Good." We sat there in the good quiet of our apartment, his hand in mine, the television murmuring, and I felt the particular peace of being home. 3 days later, everything cracked open. It was a Friday. I was not supposed to be at the clinic on Friday. I was off rotation, but someone had called out and I had agreed to cover because I am the person who agrees to cover things and then resents it in a low-grade way while also not being able to stop doing it. Story of my entire personality. Renee says I have a saving people complex and I tell her that's rich coming from someone who fostered 3 dogs she was absolutely not ready for, and she says that's completely different and we have never resolved this debate. I was there. That is the point. I was there on a Friday when I was not supposed to be there. Vivien walked in. Not on a Tuesday. Not at her scheduled time. A Friday mid-morning, unannounced, and the moment Portia came to get me I knew before I even turned around. The shape of the worry in Portia's face was specific. I went out front. She was standing at the desk. She had a coat on, a long one, belted at the waist. Her sunglasses were on. And even with the coat and the sunglasses and everything she was doing to contain whatever this was, her hands were trembling. Just slightly. Just enough. "Room 3, I said to Portia and to Vivien, "come on." When she took the sunglasses off in room 3, I had to hold myself still with everything I had. Her eye was swollen, nearly shut. Her bottom lip was split fresh, not scabbed yet, which meant recent. When she moved to sit down, she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone managing something structural, something in the ribs or the torso, something that hurt more than she was going to tell me up front. I examined her. She had 2 bruised ribs. Not broken, bruised, but the line between those two is closer than people think, and bruised ribs hurt with every breath, every movement, every moment of being alive in a body. Her eye needed monitoring. Her lip needed cleaning. The baby was okay. I checked. The baby was fine. She asked me again if the termination was possible yet. I said not yet. The placenta had not moved enough. She made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a sigh and was somewhere in between, the sound of someone absorbing a result they had feared. And then she said, her voice dropped low, barely audible, "He found the prescription bottle." I went still. He went through my bag. I was in the shower. He was looking for, I don't know what he was looking for. And he found the bottle. She swallowed. He wanted to know where I had been going. He wanted to know why there was no name on it, no pharmacy label, just the medication. He wanted names. Did you give him any? No, firm. No. I told him I found it at a friend's house. That I'd been struggling and I didn't want him to know. He didn't believe me. Vivien. He did this, she gestured to her face, her body, the whole inventory of it, because he didn't believe me. And then he left for work. Like nothing. I sat with that. The obscene normalcy of it. A man who did this and then went to work. Tell me his name, I said. And then, immediately, I stopped myself. I don't know why I asked that. It was not clinical. It was not protocol. It was something else, something personal that had no business being in that room. I'm sorry. You don't have to do that. She looked at me. Why do you want to know? I don't, I said. I shouldn't have asked. Forget I said it. She held my gaze for a long moment. His name is Carter, she said. Carter Caldwell. And there it is. I need you to understand what happened to me in the 3 seconds after she said that name. 3 seconds is not a long time. In 3 seconds you can blink twice, take a half breath, move your hand approximately 6 inches. 3 seconds feels like nothing from the outside. Inside, in those 3 seconds, my entire known world came apart at the seams. Carter. Carter Caldwell. The name I had on my phone under a heart emoji. The name I had practiced writing next to my own name in the margin of a notebook like a person in a romantic comedy, and then felt embarrassed about, and done it again. The name attached to the man whose cologne I knew by heart, whose laugh lived in my chest, who had pressed his lips to my forehead at 5:47 in the morning and said, "Go save some lives." Carter Caldwell. I did not move. I did not change my expression. My face did what it was trained to do, steady, professional, present. My hands were still. My voice, when I spoke, was even. I said, "Okay. Let me finish cleaning up that lip." And I did. I cleaned it, I dressed it, I sent her home with instructions for the ribs, for the eye, for the baby, all of it by the book, professional, complete. She left. I stood in room 3 with the door closed and the paper on the exam table still creased from where she had sat. Carter Caldwell. The business trip week when he had been away, and she had described the quiet as something she had forgotten the feeling of. The late nights. The turned-down phone screen. The suit he had taken to the dry cleaner 2 weeks ago with something I had noticed and not registered on the sleeve. The ring box in the nightstand drawer. He had a wife. He had a wife that he had been beating for years, a wife who was pregnant with his child, a wife who had come to my clinic every week for months and trusted me with the most fragile and terrible things about her life. And the entire time he had been coming home to me and pressing his lips to my forehead and saying my name like it was something he liked the taste of. The room was very quiet. I sat down on the stool because my legs had made a decision about not continuing to support me. I thought about the morning. The kiss. The cedarwood. The smile on my face at the red lights. I thought about Vivien's almost smile, the saddest almost smile I had ever seen, when I had told her to go to the police. I thought about her folding the sonogram image and putting it in her purse. I thought about Carter across the dinner table, animated about his Midtown deal, looking at me with that smile that reached his eyes. I thought about her hands trembling in the waiting room. I sat in that room for 4 minutes. I counted them. For minutes. And then I stood up, straightened my scrubs, opened the door, and walked back out into the clinic. Because my shift was not over. Because there were patients waiting. Because I was the steady thing, and the steady thing does not fall apart on a Friday morning in room 3. But inside, in the part of me that was not my training or my professionalism or my 6 years of knowing how to hold things, inside that part, something had gone absolutely, completely, irreversibly still. The way things go still right before they move very fast in a direction that changes everything. I need you to subscribe right now if you are not subscribed. Right now. Because part 2 of this story is where things get dangerous, where Jade stops being the nurse and starts being something else entirely, where 2 women who had every reason to destroy each other decide to do something neither of them planned, and where Carter Caldwell starts to understand, slowly and then all at once, what it feels like when the walls close in. You think you know where this is going. You do not know where this is going. I drove home that evening and Carter's car was in the driveway. I sat in my own car for 6 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. 6 minutes of sitting in a running car in my own driveway, looking at the warm light in our windows, thinking about all the ways I could walk through that door. I could confront him. Lay it out. Say his wife's name, watch his face change. I could say nothing. Pretend I knew nothing. Buy myself time to think. I could leave. Drive to Renee's, sit on her couch, tell her everything, let her talk me through it. I sat in the car and I thought about Vivien's ribs. How she had moved getting onto the exam table, slow and wincing and trying not to show it. I thought about her eye, swollen and deep purple. I thought about how many times before this. How many times that I didn't see because I hadn't been looking. And I thought about something else. Something cold and clear and specific. He had done this to her for years and had not been stopped. He had an entire parallel life that had run alongside mine without a seam showing. He was careful. He was controlled. He was the kind of man who could do the things he did and then come home and make pasta from scratch and light the vanilla candle and hold his girlfriend and ask her to tell him something good. If I walked in there and confronted him, I would have the satisfaction of the explosion. And then what? He would have time to prepare. To manage the narrative. To call his lawyers before I had taken a single step. He had money and he had connections, and I had nothing but what I knew, and what I knew was told to me in confidence by a woman whose name was not in any file. I thought about that. About how little I had and how much he had. And then I thought about the fact that he did not know I knew. I was the only person in the world who knew both sides of this story. I was the only person who could see the whole picture. And right now, sitting in this car, I had something that Carter Caldwell, with all his money and all his control and all his careful management of people, had never given Vivien. Time. I had time. And information. And he had no idea. I turned off the engine. I picked up my bag. I walked to the front door. I put my key in the lock. Hey, Carter called from inside, hearing the door. I made that chicken thing you liked. The one from last. Perfect, I called back. My voice was steady. Warm. Exactly right. Smells amazing. I closed the door behind me. And I smiled. And somewhere across Atlanta, in a house that was too quiet when he was in it and not quiet enough when he was gone, Vivien was sitting with her bruised ribs and her trembling hands and the folded sonogram in her purse, and she had no idea that the nurse she had trusted with the most terrible secret of her life had just walked in through the front door of the home she shared with her husband. But she was about to find out. Not yet. Not tonight. But soon. And Carter Caldwell, the man who had spent years making people feel small so that he could feel large, was about to discover what it felt like when the person closest to him knew everything and said nothing. What it felt like to be watched without knowing you were being watched. What it felt like to be the one who didn't know. That is the most powerful thing in the world, I realized, standing in my kitchen watching the man I thought I loved plate the chicken he had made from scratch. Not rage. Not evidence. Not even justice. Not yet. First, knowledge. And I had it. He did not. Game on, Carter. Game on. End of part 1. If this story just stopped your heart, you know exactly what to do. Like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think Jade should do next, and subscribe so you do not miss part 2, because I promise you the second part will have you talking about this story for days. What Carter is about to experience is nothing he is prepared for, and what Jade and Vivien find in each other is nothing either of them expected. Part 2 is coming. Do not go anywhere.